this is Ian Berry, and welcome to another Sparker Nation conversation. For those of you that don't know, a Sparker Nation is a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. My guest today is Ed Brenegar from the US, and I've been only got to know Ed recently via a mutual friend, Richard Merrick. So Ed, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Glad to be with you.
I've been fascinated by Ed's writing into trust. I think it's very insightful, and so I invited Ed to have this conversation about trust, and we're going to look at what it is and perhaps why it's broken. But we're going to start at the kind of macro level. So Ed, let's begin. What's this trust thing?
Well, if you think about every aspect of life in a society, everything is dependent upon people believing in the institutions, believing in the communities, believing in the businesses, the schools, the churches, the government. It's dependent upon them believing in them, and they believe in those things because they trust them. And so, I mean, if you look at the current economic crisis across the world, we see that a large part of the problem is that there's no trust in the economic system any longer.
No.
So what is that trust? It means that I'm willing to invest economically, with money, currency. I'm willing to use my money and invest. If it's with a business or a school or a community, I'm willing to invest in making that place better. But if it doesn't happen, if I feel like there is no trust there, then there's a real problem there. Now,
yeah.
So 2.5 years ago, I was in Nairobi, Kenya, and I was doing some speaking, and one of the groups that I spoke to was a group of business leaders who want to focus on ethics. And so I gave them my standard presentation on my leadership model called the Circle of Impact. And after that was done, we had time for a Q&A, and the first question that came up was, so what do we do about corruption in government and business? And
big question.
A big question. Great question. And I had not thought about that. I had thought about it in the sense that everybody else, I acknowledged that there's corruption there, but I hadn't thought about it. And so I came home from that trip, and at the same time, the pandemic was starting. And so I sat down and I thought about this for a couple of months. And I came to the conclusion, and was doing some research, and came to the conclusion that the problem of the loss of trust, which is important, is a product of the lack of accountability that exists for people who are in authority. So the breaking of authority and accountability is where we lose trust.
Yeah.
And if you see, the way government leaders and business leaders kind of do whatever they want to do, and it seems that it never comes back on them, when they do things that are unethical, even or illegal, it never seems to come back on them. That's that breaking of authority or responsibility and accountability. And so I think it's a major part of the issue that we face in society is how do we create a society where, in some cases, we would talk about it as the rule of law. Where does the rule of law fit into this? And is it a rule of expediency? That's we'll do what we need to do to get reelected or get elected, or these kinds of, I think, are large issues for a society to address.
Yes.
And they've become bigger and bigger over the last half century, I would say. And
yes,
and the thing that I saw in this is that, and I talk with people about this sort of thing. So I talk with them, and there's this kind of a desire to believe in their leaders, even when their leaders are not worthy of their trust. they still will believe in that because it is the most natural thing for us to do, which is we want to be able to trust the people that lead our country or lead our business or lead our communities. We want to trust them. And when they don't follow through and be trustworthy, it throws us into conflict, internal conflict, and we don't know what to do.
No.
I mean, it's not like people are going to just, we're going to get mad and we're going to become, we're going to fight the system. No, most people are not going to do that. They shrink back and they become isolated from the system, and they don't know whether to give themselves to it. I mean, let's say in your local community, you have charitable groups that are, say, taking care of feeding the poor, feeding people who are hungry, and something comes out where the person who's the head of that NGO or that nonprofit organization was skimming money off the top and was taking money that wasn't allotted for him, and so the trust in that organization, because of that leader's failure, means that organization is going to suffer because, I'm not going to give money to them because I can't trust that they're going to manage my money, my gift to them. I don't have a lot of money to give, but I want to believe that when I give my money, that it'll be used properly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it comes back to this issue of authority and accountability being sacrosanct and really important. And I see that as largely missing in large parts of our society across the globe.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. I know in our lifetime, we're roughly the same age. In our lifetime, what I've seen is, once upon a time, back when I was a boy, we were a society, and we've become an economy.
It's a well positioned contrast there. I like that.
And I remember the great pride that my father took in introducing me to the local bank manager, saying that he was a man to be trusted, and that if I needed financial advice, then he was the guy to see. Now, that wouldn't happen today. I wouldn't be recommending any bank person to my son.
No, I've known bank preferences, but there's I totally get that.
So I think that's the shift, and until the economy goes back to being part of a society, we're in trouble, in my opinion. And I think in line with what you're saying about authority and accountability, I agree 100% with that. In fact, I'm writing a piece at the moment about accountability, authority, integrity, and being a heretic. Because I'm of the belief that we need more heretics. We need people who are against the financial system, the political system, all these systems. And the reason I'm writing it in the first place is to say this is one way to restore trust.
I was having a conversation with my son this morning, and we were talking about Václav Havel, former Czech president and poet, and I think it's a playwright, and he wrote an essay, a long essay called the Power of the Powerless, I think is the way it is.
Yeah.
But what we were talking about is how what Havel saw in the decline of the socialist communist experiment in Czechoslovakia was the need for change, and he was an anti-authoritarian, and so what he did was he began to help create parallel institutions that were, in a sense, a mirror image of what the government had, but the government's institutions were no longer working, so they were going to create their own parallel institutions.
Yeah,
and that's something that I see that you can do it on a local level.
Yes, indeed, I agree.
So I think it's an interesting thing, and to imagine what would it look like if the people who are listening to you decided we're going to go create some new institutions in our local community to take care of take care of people who are in need, take care of people who need housing, people who need, we're going to take care of our schools in a way that is not being done, things like this. I think that's, to me, that's where a lot of the stuff that we're facing in our world today, this is where it ultimately leads, that we have to kind of look at our local communities and say, how can we build the institutional structure here that can allow us as neighbors to be able to not only trust each other, but also work together for the betterment of our community.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. One of my favorite books is called Local is Our Future. It's written by Helena Norberg Hodge, who spent 40 years working on things locally. And I think that's the thing. I know myself, I'm semi-retired, and where I'm putting a lot of my attention recently is to my local community and seeing where I can help, because I already see just in my early investigations that there's a lot of trust locally in a couple of places, and they're the ones that are thriving.
And that's right. And where you have that kind of trust, you have people who are willing to invest and put themselves into it. And and so we could talk about the FTX scandal, as a place where supposedly there is a trust embedded in the crypto currency ethos.
Excuse me.
But what we saw is that there is something not together.
Oh, there's three there. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah.
So people
I see he's been arrested a day or so ago.
Yeah, we'll see what that actually ends up looking like. But but you see, that's another one of those places where, if you're doing digital currency and digital investment, if you have to have an absolute sense that these people are trustworthy. Otherwise, it's never going to work. And I think this is a blow to that whole culture, that whole industry. And it doesn't make me want to put any money there.
No,
no, I like hard assets. So it's an interesting thing. So let me add another piece to this kind of global society sort of thing. So one of the things that I came to see, and I think it's relevant to this idea of the local. I have this idea that I call the two global forces, and I see that there's a global force of centralized institutions of finance and governance.
Yeah.
We see this everywhere we turn. Our national governments. There's kind of a global governing system. That the Federal Reserve, the reserve system is a global institution.
Central bankers are causing us all grief at the moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the question, it's a different conversation to talk about why, but the question is, can we trust them? That, comes back to our conversation. Yeah. So you have this centralized system, and the question is, how does a centralized system engender trust in itself? And this goes to this something that Edward Shills, who was a sociologist at the University of Chicago back in the early 60s, wrote about, called center and periphery. And he says a society has a center and it has a periphery. And the periphery will follow the center as long as the center is respectful towards the values that encompasses the whole, that both the center and the periphery. And if the center abandons those values for its own, own wealth or their own expediency, then the periphery will stop supporting them. And he doesn't go into what happens then, but when I see is that we end up with multiple multiple centers, new centers being formed.
Yeah, so it's a bit like I think Buckminster Fuller was the one that sort of said the only way to replace a system is to make the old one obsolete.
That's right.
But it kind of fits with
So-
Clavel's parallel stuff. Yeah.
So the other force, the global force that I see is the global force of decentralized networks of relationships. So
Yeah.
our relationship with one another become very much more important than maybe even they were, say, when your father introduced you to the bank president.
Yeah.
Because there's unity in that in your community, you know, between the business community and the schools and the families, and so you knew each other, and there was a kind of embedded trust there because you knew that everyone there basically believed the same sort of things and shared the same sort of values.
Yes.
But we're not there now.
No,
But
definitely the center then worked, and therefore the periphery was in line.
that's right. And now all of that is in real there's a turbulent kind of change and transition going on.
Yeah.
And what I see is that we will find the emphasis moving towards the local. And at the local level, it really is about our networks of relationships with one another.
Yes. Yeah.
And so those work because there is trust there. And this trust thing that what I see is that trust is a product of something else. And that trust is a product of our view or our collective view of one another as people worthy of dignity and respect, and that we believe that the people that I live around are people that I can build community with. And therefore, we establish trust as a product of the, in particular, respect that we have with one another.
Yes.
And I don't even think you have to have, I don't think you have to share the actual same values, but I think you have to have a value where you're willing to accept people for who they are and build a relationship of respect between you, even in a very diverse, culturally diverse place.
Yes.
You can build relationships where there is respect there, even though you may not have the cultural reference points are missing.
Yes, I call it shared view. So you've got your view, I've got mine.
That's exactly right.
What makes it work is ours.
So that that is where I see trust being built.
Yeah.
And and it becomes a part of the relational aspect of it. But
yes.
Part of the problem I see is that most of us are not living in an environment where our direct relationships with one another really matter. We're kind of captured by this kind of larger ethos of that we live in kind of a dependency on of the media and this centralized system of governance and finance.
Yes.
And so we're taking our signals from them, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I had a friend, and we were not direct business associates, but we were very supportive of the development of each of our businesses. And I was visiting with he and his family, and I won't go into all the details, but there was a moment where he made a comment about a politician, and it was very, very judgmental, very negative, and it was clear that he not only didn't like him, but he thought he was a danger to society. And I just said, well, I don't really share your vision or share your perception. I don't particularly care for him, but I don't see it the way you do it. And he tore into me as if I was trying to destroy the world. I mean, it was like,
yeah.
can you not see this? I said, well, I see what you're saying, but I don't think you know any of this by direct experience with this guy. You only know him through the screen. You only know him through your phone. You only know him through what other people have said about him. And so I'm willing to give anyone the benefit of the doubt in those circumstances. And if they prove unworthy of my trust, then I will trust them. But if they, if they prove that, they're people with clay feet, that they're real people, that they will admit when they're wrong, they will seek to repair things, repair relationships when they're broken. I'm willing to look past the things that it seemed to be egregious about a particular person, or in this case, a politician. He couldn't accept that at all, and it basically ended our relationship.
Yeah.
And we have not had any connection or contact since then. It's because I was danger to society. I was the danger to society.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, and that is really coming from the centralized media, really, because most of our views politically don't come from direct experience, as you say.
That's right.
We've had political upheaval in this country as well. I personally think for the better, but if you get into a conversation about it, there's this binary thing. If you're not for us, you're against us, kind of thing. And no one that you really talk to has had direct experience. I've never met any of the politicians I tell a lie. I've met my local federal member. I've met on one occasion with a group of other people where I didn't really have any opportunity to build any kind of relationship.
Right.
So aside from that, I don't know any politicians personally.
Right.
I'm not really interested in them, to be honest. But really, so my comments therefore are not can only be informed by other sources.
That's right.
And mostly, which comes from the media, which I don't trust. I don't trust mainstream media, and I definitely don't trust social media.
I'm with you. Well, I'm with you at the level of that. I don't trust it in an absolute sense. I listen to it and I observe
me too.
And I'm taking this in as a reflection of a certain group of people here and a certain group of this notion of respect.
Yeah, we had a little glitch there, Ed. So I might just get you weren't there for about probably 30 seconds.
Okay. Let's see where it was. So one of the things, I think this is a thing which is important for us as a society, is that ultimately we need to find a way to respect one another. I'm going to look at you and just say, well, I may not agree with everything he believes in or even his opinions on anything, but I'm going to respect him because he's a human being and he has a place in our world. And what I want to do is respect him and then build a relationship of trust. So the trust doesn't come in kind of a
so you're really saying that respect for people is a precursor to trust.
I am saying that, and I think that even when you are respecting another person, the building of trust is not an easy thing. I mean, it's hard to do.
Particularly if you don't have a lot in common or have different beliefs or different values or whatever.
I've traveled a lot around the world, particularly the last decade, and what I have found is that that there's a whole lot more we share in common with people around the world than our differences would allow us to believe.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
And so what I try to do is I want them to trust me, and so I'm going to approach them without judgment. I'm going to approach them without trying to manipulate them, exploit them. I'm going to approach them as an equal, and treat them with respect. And but at the same time, I'm also going to apply this principle of accountability in the relationship.
Yes.
So and I've had people who have written to me, and they have been very clever in the way they approach me in trying to get me to give them money. And I don't doubt that they need money.
No.
But they're trying to exploit me because I'm willing to engage with them in a relationship, and it's one of those things where in several situations I've had to say, I've told you that I won't give you money, and yet you continue to seek to manipulate me into giving you money. I want you to know that our relationship now is over, and I just will not respond to you in any way here on out. And that's the kind of accountability that we need, because at that point, when that accountability comes and you don't get what you want, then you may not like me, you may not approve of me, but what you know is that you can trust what I'm saying.
Yes.
And going to be good to my word. And
I think this is kind of goes back to what you're saying before, that I'm hearing it. Accountability proves trust, and how authority is used also proves trust, or disproves it.
Or disproves it. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, and how? Maybe you have an idea for this. How did we get here? How did we end up in this place in a society which has all the benefits that anyone could ever want to have? How did we end up in this place where there is no accountability and trust and respect are at such a low level?
I've got a couple of theories. One of them is we moved away from our grandparents.
Oh boy, yes.
And I think there was a breakdown of local society as a consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was fortunate in this regard, but I know some people who weren't. I lived a mile from my mother's parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a lot of time there as a boy. And both my grandfather and my grandmother were my best mentors. They gave me a grounding in life that I still follow. People that haven't had that have a different view. So in general terms, I would say, yeah, we moved away from our grandparents. We went and got a job in another city, and we didn't have that family support anymore. Yeah. But I think there's been a breakdown of the local society because people move to get jobs or whatever. And it's very difficult to reestablish that. I know we moved away. My wife and I, we had a young family, and we moved in our 20s. And I think we missed that infrastructure.
Yeah.
We were probably, we made our own way, and we were fortunate because I think we're at an age, and we were both mature for our age. But I think, as a general rule, I've met lots of people over my lifetime who didn't have that support when they were young. But I've also seen the breakdown of local society. The good news is I'm seeing a regeneration of it.
Yeah, I see that too. Well, let me tell you my grandparents. My grandmother, who we called Drawn Mare, this is my mother's mother. She was the grande dame of the family. She was the matriarch, and she was very principled. And she and my grandfather had 4 daughters, and from those 4 daughters are 15 grandchildren, and we're all within probably 10 years of each other in age. So it's very compact, and we were all very close. And I didn't have a brother, but my cousins were my brothers growing up.
Yeah.
And I don't, excuse me, I don't know why she said this to me, but she obviously saw something in me that was worthy of correction, maybe, or at least advice. So I was probably 11, maybe 12 years old, and she told me, "You may do anything that you want to do, but do not bring shame to the family name." And that was so important to me, because it was like not a negative thing, but it was establishing boundary,
Yeah.
permissible boundaries that would guide me to this very day. It's
Yeah.
still an important thing in my mind that guides how I operate. So I know I've not done things which I know would have brought shame to my family, because I'm just going to go try things. I got some adventure in me, and I want to go try things. But I recognize, and she was basically saying to me, if you do this, then you will lose respect, and you will lose trust. Those are not her words; those are my words. But that's essentially what she was saying.
Yes.
And so I think you're totally correct.
I had the same thing. My grandpa sheriff, who I'm talking about, used to say, "Your word is your bond. Never say anything that you want to take back later."
Oh yeah. Well, he and my grandmother would get along well.
So I've lived that way ever since.
Me too. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing that someone 2 generations ago would have such an influence on us at our age, and yet they do.
In our little community here, where there's about 20,000 people, we have 40 grandparents taking care of kids whose parents, for whatever reason, are unable to be parents.
Uh-huh.
And
that's a big phenomenon.
I've inquired a little bit, and it's happening in lots of places.
Yes, it is.
And that to me is further evidence that the local society has broken down. The good news is it's regenerating, but I think that's a key as to why there isn't trust in governance, finance, the media, or any centralized global system.
Well, let me ask you this: what effect do you think the COVID pandemic had on all of this?
I think it increased trust in some way.
Say more about that. I'm curious as to what you mean by that.
I think the positive is it's brought people together more, and it's forced. Now there have been negative consequences. There's been increases in domestic violence and other things, but on the positive side, there has been a lot of restoration of relationships that were forced because they, one simple example. One guy, him and his wife were having, they were struggling, and the pandemic meant, because this guy was traveling all the time, he was away every week, and over time it undermined their relationship. And then all of a sudden he was in lockdown for 6 months, and it regenerated their relationship, being in the house together again. And now he's rejigged his work so that he's home more. I know in my own groups, as you know, I've got four groups that meet online, and we were meeting online long before the pandemic.
Right.
So nothing changed for us. But what we saw was our ability to help other people who weren't experienced online. We were all every member of my groups has been able to help at least one person, but in most cases many people, to get used to the online environment. So I've seen lots of positives. I'm aware of that. We have a domestic violence epidemic in this country. We have a suicide epidemic where people between the ages of, I think between ages of 16 and 24, it's the highest suicide rate in the world.
Wow.
So we got a lot of problems, and the pandemic didn't help.
Right.
So there's downside, but I think the upside is a lot more than the downside.
So if we can go back to my two global forces thing, so you got the centralized and you got the decentralized. You got you got institutions that are centralized and kind of authoritarian in the way they function. You have relationships, and what I see is the outcome of the pandemic was they lost prominence, and this grew up. This
no doubt. Central systems are in massive decline, and decentralized system based on relationships, they're on a big upturn. No doubt.
And so what I have found, and this is unlike anything I've ever experienced in my career, is that there is an audience forming around my ideas that I never had before. And I think it's because people have questions that they're not getting answered by the centralized institutional sources, and they're looking for other sources for information and perspective. They want to know, they want to make sense of what they're going through, and so I'm having, I began writing on Substack back in January.
Yes, and I'll put a link to it for folks who are watching this. I'll put a link to that under this video.
Well, thank you. But I'm having people sign up for that every day, and particularly, and this has particularly been true the last 3-4 months, and it's just I don't know what to do with it. It's really nice. But it's kind of strange for me because I've never had this kind of attention. But what I'm seeing is that what we're transitioning into a new era, and this transition will be where people will have a greater sense of confidence that they can do things that make a difference in their community.
Indeed. Well, I must say, Ed, that one of the reasons why, although we were introduced by a mutual colleague, the reason we're having this conversation is because of what I read by you about trust on Substack.
Well, people can go read that there. So this is a question to me. So this trust issue really goes to the question of leadership in society. Yeah. And so this is kind of what I want your audience, your viewers and listeners to hear, that our understanding of leadership is changing and has to change. And if it doesn't change, we're sunk. And what we have looked at as leaders are people who have a title and a role within an institutional structure. But those are not leaders, they are managers. And what real leadership is when a person like you or me, or like anyone that's watching this, takes personal initiative to want to make a difference. So my definition is all leadership begins with personal initiative to create impact that makes a difference that matters. Yeah. So it's not about some kind of big impact, that, explodes the world into beautiful things. No, it's the little things that really matter. Yeah. And the collective weight of lots of little things by lots of different people is really how our society will lift itself up over and overcome a lot of the stuff that we've had to go through.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm seeing, once upon a time I was a professional speaker for over 30 years, and I was reflecting on this yesterday when we had a bunch of our groups, those that are within a sort of hour and a half of each other. We met for lunch yesterday, and we were reflecting on this concept, and I was saying to them that I've spoken to audiences of 5,000 people on many occasions, but I think I can make more impact on my neighbour next door than I could in anybody in that 5,000 audience.
Yeah,
and that's kind of where I've sort of got to. Partly I was driven here by health challenges, but my personal initiative is to make an impact within my neighbourhood and in my local community as much as it is anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. We have a lack of leadership, and that's no accountability, abuse of authority, and lack of integrity.
It's all of those things.
Yeah.
And so, the thing I would say about our relationships is this: you want to build relationships of respect based on some kind of shared values. And it doesn't require a lot of values. There just needs to be one or two that seem to be enough for you to rally around each other and say, let's build something that makes a difference because of the things that we share. Maybe it's that we care about children, or maybe we care about the dignity of people, something like that. It's the preference of the individual or the group or the people in relationships. It's not me. I don't know what you should believe. That's up to you. It's that sort of thing. The second thing out of that respect, that practice of respect, is where the trust comes from. Yeah. And so when we trust each other, we're willing to invest. And when that trust comes, then we are willing to display mutual accountability to one another. And I've started working with a group of students in Switzerland online, and they're leadership students. And I told them the first time I met them, I says, all this conversation started as the fact that you don't have any adult mentors there at the university. They're ones mentoring you. And I just said, I'm offering to mentor you. But what I'm really saying is, I don't want just to mentor you. I want you to mentor me. I want you to tell me things.
Yeah.
I want you to hold me accountable. So there's this mutual mentoring that goes on. And when you have that kind of mutuality, I think trust can find a much more solid ground for how it gets expressed in all these different ways.
Yes, I love a couple of things there. The practice of respect, you said, which I think I hadn't thought of respect in that way before. It's actually a practice.
Yes.
Like meditation, like going for a daily walk, like an exercise routine. Respect is a practice.
Yeah.
And I like this idea of mutuality. I didn't know it was a word before, but it's a nice take. Yeah. And I'm the same, although I host these groups and I'm seen as the mentor, I'm equally being mentored by them, and that's an open secret.
Yeah. Well, but you see, if we can create this sort of thing that you and I are talking about right now, in our own lives, and we can influence others to create the same sort of things, then we begin to rebuild what I hesitate to call it this, but kind of a moral infrastructure for society.
Well, it's really your circle of impact, isn't it, in a way, isn't it?
It is. It's clearly about the circle of impact, which is my model of leadership. And I'll just quickly describe what that is for people. So yeah. I see there are three dimensions of leadership. There is the dimension of ideas, the dimension of relationships, and the dimension of structure. And they need to be aligned. And I think we should align them around what is the impact we want to have. So what is the impact we want to have from our ideas, from our relationships, and from our structure? And what I've found as a consultant over the last quarter century is that most businesses, most organizations, most leaders of those have no clue as to what the impact should be. They're very, very focused on numbers, and they're very focused on, survival, and they're, all their pet projects. But they're not asking, so what should be the impact of our organization? What change should we be able to see that benefits our customers or benefits our community?
Yeah.
So that's the way I've kind of oriented my work. And it's interesting when people catch that idea, because once you begin to say, this is the impact I want to have, then you have a way for other people to measure you against your own ideals. and then therefore that's how another form of accountability begins to happen.
Yes.
And
yeah, we've got an ongoing conversation in our wise leader groups about the shift from purpose to impact.
Is that right? I'm glad to hear that.
And the organizer, in fact, I'm writing what will be a very long article, which I'm writing an article on the shift from purpose to impact, because what we're seeing, and as we talk about this, and as the folks in the groups apply it in their own organizations, what we're seeing is that conversations about impact are more important than conversations about purpose. Purpose is still important, but the practicalities of talking about impact are more important.
In my model, Circle of Impact, I have 4 ideas. I call them the 4 connecting ideas. And these are the ideas that are derived from the dimension of ideas. And there is the values, there's purpose, there's vision, and there's impact. And the values are fundamental and they're non-negotiable. You decide what those values are, and you sacrifice your organization to secure those values in perpetuity. So you will say no to things because those values are so important to how you define yourself. Purpose is derived from those values, and the purpose needs to be defined in terms of what is your impact. So it's a purpose for impact. And then the vision piece is actually something that we share together. So I think when your values are incorporated into your relationships where you have respect and trust, at that point, together you can create a vision for impact that then defines the kind of structure you need to achieve that impact. So, but structure kind of, in most places, it precedes everything. So you just have to work with what you got.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying that no, it's the last thing you should be considering. And once you're clear about what your impact should be and what you as a group of people, your vision for what impact have, then you say, well, this is the kind of structure we need in order to get there.
Yeah.
And my guess is that if most businesses or organizations would take that tact, they would find that the structure they have is not workable in that regard.
No, that's because the structure in most organizations is about profit making and serving shareholders, a centralized system. Again.
That's right. There you go.
Yeah, so we're definitely aligned about that. And the good news is I'm seeing lots of organizations shifting away from the old shareholder model to focus on the impact that they're making, particularly where my particular interest is the impact that they're making in the communities in which they operate.
I think it's really important, and I see the same thing, but I think it's particularly important in those organizations which are oriented around social service, like hospitals and social welfare organizations, things like that. Because if they're not focused on the impact, then what are they trying to do? Just stay alive, stay in business? That's not sufficient at all. And yet that's what we find, in so many places.
Yeah. And so how do we, so I think we're in agreement. Centralization is a problem. Decentralization is on the move. Relationships are at the heart of that. Respect and the practice of respect is a key to relationships, and the consequence of respect working is trust.
Right.
How do we encourage folks to adopt this practice of respect more? I guess part of it, and we haven't touched on this yet, but part of it's being trustworthy ourselves.
Yeah, it really starts with yourself. And I think there are 2 things to say here. I think, and with the centralized institutions, all they need to do is institute real measures of accountability. if they were to do that, it would transform everything.
Yeah.
I'm not negative about centralization in the abstract. I think there is a benefit to that structure. I am negative when it becomes corrupted where there's no authority. The second thing is that I think people need to understand that they can lead merely by taking personal initiative to create impact. And that is where people will look at them and say, boy, look at what they're doing. I respect them. And then a relationship can form where there's trust, and it can transform how an organization or a community can function.
Yes. Two simple yet profound insights, I think. Because you're right. If there's real accountability and there's genuine authority, and there are people around with personal initiatives to create impact who are finding buddies and there's a common cause,
right?
Then it's going to work. I went to the AGM of the one of the local, or the sort of the local community group. In my community, there's probably 35 people in the room, and I think most of the people there, including me, were expecting a very boring AGM. And the AGM itself didn't last. It went about 25 minutes, but the conversation that followed over dinner was fascinating. Where it was clear that this was a core group of people who had a lot of common ground, and that the reason why things were working and that impact was being made was because of the relationships that they'd established.
Let me say something in particular about what you just described. You know, when you're a consultant and you go into a business, and you're going to talk to a lot of different people, and I called myself an intimate outsider. So I'd come in and people would talk to me in ways they would not talk to anyone else. Some of that is the fact
I know that one. Yep.
Some of that was because of my training. Is I was trained as a minister, so I learned how to talk to people. So the thing which I discovered over a period of time was this, and I think it describes what you just described, that there is a persistent residual culture of values that exist in organizations and communities, and it persists because it resides in the relationships of people.
I would say more it's the behaviors of the values, the consistency of the behaviors that show the values are being lived.
Yeah, well, it's because the relationships matter to each other, and so there's values informed, and what I see is that is the culture of the company. It's not the culture which is passed down from the CEO's office, thinking that I'm going to be a culture creator. No, there's a culture already there.
Yeah.
Culture in your community. There's a culture in your business. There's a culture in your school. It's already there. The question is, will the leadership, the organizational leadership, decide to walk beside and walk in the midst of that culture and support it and elevate it so that it can have, it can have impact, but also that's how leaders, organizational leaders, show that they respect the people that they lead. And when they say, I want to walk beside you, I want to take this culture, which I see that has bound you all together in some kind of love for this institution or love for this community. I want to walk with you and support this and elevate it as one of you. When you see that kind of leadership, then you see the kinds of things that you're talking about and I'm talking about popping up in places that you wouldn't have expected otherwise.
No, it's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, I think, Ed, that's probably a nice spot for us to conclude this conversation, but I suspect we'll be having more conversations.
I welcome that opportunity, and I think there's some things there that we should talk about some more.
Yeah, indeed. So we look forward to that. I'll just stop the recording, but really appreciate your insights and your expertise and also your experience.
Thank you very much, Ian. I've enjoyed.